ladies and gentlemen, to the Philly Factor. My name is Paul Perrello, and I am so glad to welcome back to the show a good friend, Irene Levy Baker, who joined us a number of seasons ago, and she was here to talk about, I think, not one, but two of her books, and she's back to talk about her third book. So, Irene, it's a pleasure to catch up with you in this new world, this new arena that we're in these days, a Zoom call. But needless to say, I am so anxious to talk about volume 2 or edition 2 of your book. And I thought of, towards the end of one of the shows that you were on, that I sort of predicted that there would be a second 100 Things to Do in Philadelphia. So congratulations on volume 2.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. It's so nice to be back. And yeah, I guess you did predict that there'd be a second edition of the book. And I think you knew that even before I did. This second volume of the book has, every single page has been updated. It has 20% things that are new to Philadelphia. Things like Wonder Space, which I can tell you about, and the American Revolution Museum, which wasn't in the first edition. It also has lots of lesser known things, because I realized a lot of locals are reading the book, and there are things that even longtime locals will discover when they read the book. So this edition was really fun to write. So
we Philadelphians think we know everything that there is to know about Philadelphia. And so it takes sort of a transplant to come to Philadelphia, because you're originally from Ohio, if my memory serves me correct.
That's correct. Good memory.
And so does that give you a different perspective then when you set out on writing a book or two like this, because you sort of see things differently than us native Philadelphians that think we know everything that there is to know about Philadelphia?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a Philadelphian by choice, not by birth, but I've been here a good long time. I've been in Philadelphia almost 30 years. So I've had a chance to get to know it. But because I'm not native to Philadelphia, I do think that makes it easier to love Philadelphia. I have a real affection for the city, and I spent a lot of time exploring the city on my own. And I worked for a decade at the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau. So that was a long answer, and the short answer is yes, I think so.
Yeah. From the time that you wrote the first book until now, the city has evolved and has changed by leaps and bounds. So I guess the tendency is for you as an author to try to figure out what to include in the second edition of the book, because while you're putting the second edition to bed to be published, there are probably a whole list of things that are still coming down the pike. So how do you stay on top of all these things that are occurring in Philadelphia?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a full-time job. Just this week, I listened to a Zoom call with the new Neon Museum that just opened in Philadelphia. Okay. I mentioned that in my introduction, but it was still under construction when the book was printed. The book just came out in October. I also was on a Zoom call with the Preservation Alliance talking about, architecture around City Hall. So I'm constantly learning new things about Philadelphia and incorporating them into the work that I do. Putting them into my blog, putting them on my social media. But yeah, it's definitely a full-time job, but it's one that I love doing.
Given the new world that we're in these days, dealing with the pandemic, how has that impacted your ability as an author to maybe go out and explore some of these places or include these places in your book? Although when you wrote the book, we weren't in the throes of a pandemic like we are right now. But for instance, what if somebody wants to visit some of the places that you've included in the book, but they're not sure that they can actually get out and visit some of these places because of, social distancing and requirements that prevent them from getting out as much as they would like?
So that's a good question. And like everybody else during the pandemic, I've had to pivot. So one thing I do a lot of talking about is things that we can do during the pandemic, good places to social distance. One of my very favorite places to social distance is Laurel Hill Cemetery.
Wow.
This is
Yeah.
a historic cemetery where people are buried like Civil War generals, victims from the Titanic, people with names like Wanamaker, Strawbridge, even Harry Callis, the former Phillies announcer. He's buried there, and his tombstone is shaped like a giant stone microphone, and it's surrounded by seats from the vet. But there's lots of things people can still do right now. There's ice skating at City Hall in Dilworth Park and ice skating on the Delaware River at the Blue Cross River Rink. There's going to the zoo. All of the outdoor exhibits at the zoo are open. And guess what? I'm told the animals miss us. It made me feel so good to know that we amuse them as much as they amuse us.
Sure. Yeah, that's
so
funny.
There's still plenty of things that people can do. And I talk a lot about those kind of things right now.
So when you set out to do volume two, were there ideas that were submitted to you by people that read volume one, and they said you may have had a book talk at that time, and somebody may have come up to you in some neighborhood in Philadelphia and say, Irene, you've got to check this place out, and you got to include it in your book. And it was sort of that eye-opening experience, like, I didn't even know this place existed.
Totally. At almost every book talk I do, someone tells me about something in their neighborhood that I might want to include. And I do keep a running list of places I might want to include in the next book, of places that change, like the Penn Museum opened several new galleries. So that needed to be updated. That always gives me new places to explore. Someone just told me about the Haddonfield Sculpture Tour. It's in downtown, charming little downtown Haddonfield, which is a real walkable downtown with shops and chocolate shops and ice cream stores and lots of outside dining. They have a sculpture tour. It's about a mile and a half, and it takes about 2-3 hours. You can get a map off the website, and it includes things like a giant blue dog in the middle of downtown and a life-size giraffe.
Life-size giraffe, okay.
Two sculptures by Eric Berg, a rabbit and a turtle.
Okay.
Does his name sound familiar to
you
at all?
A little bit, yeah.
I'll tell you why. Eric Berg also did some sculptures in Fittler Square, the Drexel Dragon, and Filbert the Pig at Reading Terminal Market.
How about that?
So I spent a delightful, socially distant, safe day exploring Haddonfield just because someone at a book talk told me about it and it sounded like a good idea. And now I like to share it.
Yeah, for sure. Now, in this book, from what I've gathered, you've sort of branched out from just Philadelphia per se. And, we often think of, Philadelphia as the entire area, not necessarily just within the city limits, but you have, like you just talked about Haddonfield, you have crossed over the river and have gone into some cities and towns that are part of the Philadelphia area, but not necessarily Philadelphia.
That's true, because the title 100 Things to Do in the Philadelphia Greater Region doesn't just have the same ring to it. It doesn't have the same ring to it.
You're right.
But the book does include the surrounding suburbs as well as South Jersey. For example, one of the places I discovered for this edition of the book is in South Jersey. Another place is the Cowtown Rodeo, which is an old-fashioned rodeo.
Yeah.
It is one of the oldest in the country, and it is a wonderful way to spend a summer evening. Good old-fashioned Americana.
So did you put on the cowboy boots and the cowboy hat to go to the rodeo?
I will tell you, Paul, if you have a cowboy hat or boots that you only get to wear on Halloween, you can totally wear them here, and no one will look at you sideways.
Wow. Yeah.
It's super fun.
One of those treasures that are out there that, people in South Jersey may be familiar with, but outside of that geographic area, they may not, people in Northeast Philadelphia may not even know that Cowtown Rodeo even exists.
Exactly. And people in South Jersey may not know about Legoland in Plymouth Meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought Legoland was awesome. They
I
have a giant skyline of Philadelphia made with Legos,
Wow.
so detailed, made of 1.5 million Legos.
Wow. How would
Yeah,
you like
it's
to be the
really
person?
cool.
How would you like to be the person that has to count all those Legos putting that thing together? Right.
Or
Uh,
designing the tiny city hall out of Legos.
yeah. Yeah. Just as an aside, I mean, we talk about Legos. I mean, I know when I was growing up, we had all those blocks that we put together, and talk about a toy that you would think would be obsolete by today's standards where we are in the 21st century. Legos are still going strong. It's amazing that Legos are still like one of the number one toys, for kids today. It's amazing.
Well, and you never need them more than now, right?
For sure, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about how we're all confined to home and maybe not getting out or even going on vacation or not even getting outside the confines of our home. How does your book help people then explore some of the neighborhoods and some of the nooks and crannies of Philadelphia that we might like to get to see, but maybe now's not really the right time to get out to see some of these places?
Well, the vaccine's around the corner, so we all have a lot to look forward to. So I suggest people read the book, cross out things they've already done, and circle or dog ear the things they have yet to do, which will
Okay.
give us all something to look forward to. But there are still lots of things in the book you can do right now. This afternoon, you could go to the Audubon Society Museum, which is it's the house where John James Audubon lived as a young man when he became interested in birding.
Okay.
And it's where he first was exposed to American birds and started doing his drawings. And the museum opened recently. It's closed right now for the pandemic, but there are 4 miles of birding trails all around the museum. And those trails are open. So you could go explore, do some birding. And I'm here to tell you that I learned that the early bird does get the worm. The earlier you go, the more birds you will see.
Wow.
So there are plenty of things like that are new. There's also things like mural arts tours. During non-pandemic times, you can take them by trolley or by bus, but they have also been offering socially distant tours. And you can see some of the beautiful murals in the all around Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the mural arts capital of the world with nearly 4,000 murals.
Wow.
If you prefer not to do it with them, they also have self-guided mural tours on their website that you can do. And then you can do it alone and on your own.
Fascinating stuff. I know there in your book, there's a water ice stand in South Philadelphia, and I'm very, very familiar with it because I grew up with Pop's water ice right there at Broad in Oregon. And
Yes.
yet, a lot of people may not think that a corner store like that would be included in the book. Now, of course, we're still sitting here and it's still cold outside, but when the warmer months come around and Pops reopens, there's a line that goes around the block. So how did you stumble upon Pops?
Pops is in my Unique Eats book because I love telling good stories. And in the Unique Eats book, I tell the story of Joe, who runs it with his 5 cousins. Mm-hmm. His grandfather opened the ice cream, Pop's water ice. He used to have a water ice push cart that he pushed around South Philadelphia. And it was super heavy. It was a very difficult job. One day there was a heat wave and he was dreading having to push this heavy, heavy cart all over South Philadelphia. And he got ready to go. He lifted his garage door and there was already a line of people. Even back then, there was a line of people down his driveway to get his water ice.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm crazy. Why am I pushing this around South Philadelphia if the people will come to me? So he set up his water ice stand right there in his garage. And his 6 grandchildren run it from the same spot today using his same recipes. He's also mentioned in the new second edition of the 100 Things book when I talk about water ice being one of those Philadelphia foods.
Sure.
There's also a list of secret speakeasies. Now, these are places that are closed right now, but this is definitely a page you should dog ear and try to go to as soon as you can when they reopen.
When when we talked about the first book, and I predicted that there was enough fodder for a second book. I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, might there be a third book? Because I probably already know the answer to that. But how do you vet these locations? I mean, because there are some places that pop up and they're institutions like Pops. Then there are some that pop up and they're there for a year or a season or two and then just disappear. So what is the criteria to be included in your book, Irene?
That's such a good question, Paul. So some places like the Birding Museum and the Race Car Museum, which is called the Simeone Automotive Museum, I'm not an expert in birding or cars. So I went to them with a friend who's very well versed in those things.
Okay.
Because I wanted to see what they were like, both from a novice's point of view and from an expert's point of view. So in some cases, I did research with friends I handpicked to get two different points of view. In other cases, if I found it interesting, if they had a good story to tell, and especially with this edition, which I had more locals in mind, so I tried to come up with things that were different and interesting. It was just if they piqued people's curiosity. Sure.
We and you probably know this because your years that you worked with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, we Philadelphians pride ourselves on being a city of neighborhoods. Everybody sort of associates with, well, I'm from South Philly, or I'm from Northeast Philadelphia, or I'm from Schuylkill, or I'm from, Southwark. So everybody associates, with a different section of the city. Has there been any part of town or any section of the city that you wish you could get further into or explore more if the circumstances, warrant, that you're like, gee, I wish I could spend more time in the River Wards, or I wish I could spend more time in Kensington, or spend more time in Port Richmond?
Yes, every neighborhood has great secrets. And the more time I spend, the more I discover. Like I went down to Kennett Square to tour a mushroom farm. And I ended up discovering so much more when I was there. I discovered a restaurant that had a great story that ended up in one of my books. I discovered an ice cream parlor that made great flavors like avocado ice cream. I discovered the mushroom farms and wrote about all those things in my book. So the more time I spend in Fishtown or Kensington or South Philadelphia, the more I discover. And I continue to share those things. And I also really love sharing tips about everything. So for every museum, for every neighborhood, I try to share what's the best time to visit, or how can you get a discount, or if you go to the Helicopter Museum in Westchester, where's the best place to start and why? So I try to do some exploration there too and figure out the ins and the outs and share them with my readers.
You mentioned at the outset of the interview, at the outset of our interview, Wonder Space. And this is, I want you to go into that a little bit more, because this is the first time that I've actually heard of this place, this Wonder Space. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
This is definitely, Wonder Space just reopened. You definitely want to put it on your to-do list. It's the Fashion District opened shortly before the pandemic, and it's where Market East used to be. Okay. It's bigger, it's brighter, it has some typical mall stores, but it also has some really fun things like a beef jerky store, some locally owned store, a Seen on TV store, and Wonder Space. Wonder Space is an interactive art gallery. So there's virtual reality, there's optical illusions there. And so you walk around and you experience the art. It's going to be changing periodically, so you can go over and over again to see different kinds of things. And I would definitely recommend it. You put that one on your to-do list.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. Given your tenure with the Convention and Visitors Bureau and now what you're doing, I have to ask, do you miss the daily regimen of working for the Convention and Visitors Bureau? Because part of what you're doing is getting the message and the word out about Philadelphia to tourists and to writers in the tourism industry. But it seems like what you're doing today is just as equally important, if not more so, in getting the word out about Philadelphia.
I loved my years at the Convention and Visitors Bureau. I love working with the hospitality industry. I feel like my mission is very much the same in many ways. And during the pandemic, I've continued to write about restaurants and museums reopening, because that's the way that I can help restaurants, museums, and the hospitality industry to recover from the pandemic. So I continue to do that every single day.
Yeah. So on a daily basis, Irene, on a regular day, whether you're going through a local newspaper or a magazine or just walking through Rittenhouse Square or whatever, is there give us an idea of how you come across many of these ideas that are included in your book? I mean, do you just stop for a moment, look up and say, gee, this is new. I should make sure I come back and visit it and might be able to use it for, a future book down the road?
Yes. Yes. As I'm walking around the city and I see the different kinds of chalets that restaurants have built, or as I see I read about a new exhibit that's open, or somebody tells me about something they heard, or they forward me an email, or I'm reading the news media. I discover things everywhere. And when I'm not working on a book, I might snap a picture and put it up on Instagram or Facebook, or put it into one of my blog postings.
Yeah. Was there ever a location or a place that you came across and you said, I'm not quite sure if this is right for inclusion in a new book or on my blog?
Yeah, sure. If I didn't find it fascinating, then there were so many things that were fascinating that it was easy not to include it. Although there were times when it didn't interest me so much, but I knew it would interest other people. And I would say things like, if you're interested in woodworking and architecture, this is a place you really might want to visit. So I tried to help people decide which ones might appeal to them based on what's there.
Sure. We just have a few minutes left, and we could go on and talk for hours and hours and hours. So I'm going to put your feet to the fire here and ask, might there be a volume 3?
Well, my publisher keeps asking me the same question.
And that's what you told me last time, too.
And it's true. But I keep telling him I can only think about one book at a time. 100 Things to Do in Philadelphia is my baby right now. And it's hard to say what the future will hold. But, Philadelphia is growing. New things are opening. New things are always happening. So the future remains to be seen.
How much time goes into, and we're talking about the physicality of time here, but how much time and effort goes into actually publishing that book? I mean, you could tour one end of the city to the other, 365 days a year, but how much time does it take to put together the actual tangible book?
It took me 1 year to do the rewrite, which meant researching all the museum and going to all the places, the museums, there's shopping and fashion, there's music and entertainment, there's sports and recreation, history and culture, and food and drink. So it took me a year to research and write up the places I wanted to put in the second edition, and update every single page that was in the first edition to see if there'd been changes or things I needed to update. And then it takes about 7 months of editing, typesetting, design, printing, going back and forth, getting the book just right with my publisher. So I would say it was a year and 3/4 or almost 2 years in the making.
Yeah.
Takes a long time.
Yeah. Is there any area or a specific area that you're starting to see trend all of a sudden? Something that may not have been there a year or two ago, and all of a sudden you're recognizing this as one of those hot new areas that's going to get a lot of attention in perhaps the next year or two.
Well, I do see a lot of new things that are going to be coming that we're going to see happening in Philadelphia. The Neon Museum I mentioned just opened. We have an esports stadium that's going to be opening. We have a Bible museum that's going to be opening. So I think when the pandemic is over, we have 3 or 4 hotels that have opened during the pandemic even.
Sure.
There's
Yeah.
the Hyatt Centric and the Canopy and the W Hotel is going to be opening. So I think in the next few months, Philadelphia is just going to be booming because, remember Prohibition and we don't remember it personally, but what happened after Prohibition? The Roaring 20s. So
Yeah.
I predict that's what's ahead for us.
Wow. Well, let's hope you're right for sure. I want to thank you so much for your time. As always, we could go on for another hour and talk about this great city of ours and all the regions around us. I want to congratulate you on your new edition of your book. Continued success, stay safe, and I look forward to having you back and discuss your next book. I'm going to hold you to it. So
I feel like you're in cahoots with my publisher.
I'm going to get on the phone with them as soon as we're done, as a matter of fact. Irene, thank you so much for your time. Again, great job with the book, and I look forward to speaking with you real soon.
Thank you. You too.
All right. So until the next time, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul Perrello. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Philly Factor. We'll catch you next time around.